Whatever your own politics, this is a really big moment. Labour could now be an opposition that gets things done, carries out effective scrutiny, irrespective of anyone's ideas. Labour under Corbyn struggled to ever do that. It's not healthy in our political system to have a government without effective opposition. It makes the compass wonky. Starmer has a massive task to get the parties to start working in that way again, actually to make it function in a way that's anything like normal. That, Michael, is from Laura Kuensberg. Solid, sober, serious outing from Starmer on Mar. Such a relief to be able to feel some reassurance watching a Labour leader, not a sense of embarrassment. Good to have a grown-up. He looks very comfortable, which is a good start, but he has such a mountain to climb. That was from Aisha Hazarika. As you can tell from the date, Michael, those were tweets that were sent around a year ago when Keir Starmer first became leader of the Labour Party. It is the 1 year anniversary of his election as the opposition to Boris Johnson's government. And what we are going to do this video is, I guess, see whether we think he has had a successful first year or not. And to do this, Michael, what we are going to do is go through and review 10 pledges that Starmer promised would take Labour to victory and also at the same time retain the principles of the Labour Party, and see if Labour supporters should still have confidence in old Starmer. And so, as you can see on screen, Michael, the first pledge concerns economic justice. I'll read out the description. Increase income tax for the top 5% of earners. Reverse the Tories' cut in corporation tax and clamp down on tax avoidance, particularly of large corporations. No stepping back from our core principles. So, Michael, do you think that Keir Starmer has kept this pledge of economic justice?
Well, considering the fact that Keir Starmer has come out and backed a delay in raising corporation tax because he thought it could hinder the UK's economic recovery in the wake of the COVID pandemic, it seems that he has quite decisively walked back on his claim to reverse the Conservative corporation tax cuts.
Yes, he did. Of course, Rishi Sunak had his budget last month and he planned to increase corporation tax from 19% to 25%. And as you said, Michael, Labour under Starmer opposed that.
Well, yes, regarding Labour's principles, you'd think one of the things that Labour should support is invigorating the economy. However, fittingly, of course, Starmer doesn't want to raise taxes, and therefore he also is opposing spending, and Starmer moved to rein in the shadow cabinet's spending plan. So, of course, the shadow cabinet is how the leader of the opposition can show us what he'd be doing, and what he's basically said is that he will be making sure that there is not too much spending, so imitating austerity effectively.
Yeah, and I like this meme, Michael, actually, on that front. As you can see on this screen now, Biden, we should be investing in deficit spending in order to generate economic growth. Starmer, the level of debt is much higher than it's ever been before. There are going to have to be long-term answers of how we repay that. Yeah, essentially, looking over to the other side of the Atlantic, Biden has correctly rejected the politics of austerity. And on this side of the channel, the supposed left-wing party has not, and is still embracing those politics, which again is incredibly disappointing. So yeah.
Remember when people used to say, like, oh, the Democrats are like our version of the Conservative Party? Well, now we're actually at a situation where the Democrats are more left-wing on some issues than our Labour Party. So how the tables turn, eh?
Yeah, indeed, Michael. Very sad to see. But anyway, that's economic justice. We are now going to move on to social justice. And I'm just going to highlight a specific sentence I want to tackle here. Stand up for universal services and defend our NHS. Stand up for universal services and defend our NHS. So this is interesting because on the NHS front, recently the Conservatives and Rishi Sunak have been criticised for only giving nurses a 1% pay rise. Of course, we've just had a pandemic when many of them have been put through horrible conditions and they have been rewarded with a measly 1% pay rise. And Labour's Lisa Nandy correctly called it disgraceful. Absolutely disgraceful, Michael. She said it should not be 1%. It should be 2%. That's right. She called for a 2.1% raise. What a massive difference that would be, eh?
It's double.
I know, right? The SNP are giving nurses a 5% pay increase, by the way, in Scotland, which is nice. Still not what you'd probably like to see, but, a lot better. And yeah, I think on the whole, of course, Starmer has been praising the NHS like every other politician this last year, of course. But yeah, especially when it comes time to rewarding those people, he has, I think, pretty convincingly failed in that regard, and that should not be the case for a Labour leader. Only 2%? I mean, come on. And here's the thing, you could bash the Conservatives and Sunak so much for this. 1%? The opinion polls are massively favour a massive pay increase for nurses, but he just hasn't done it. So yeah, on this front with social justice, Michael, not the best again.
And the worst thing is, seeing as it's so far away from him actually getting elected, he could have just said he'd give them a 5% increase just for the clout and then not even done it. And he didn't even manage to do that.
I know, Michael, shocking. We're going to skip one now and go on to Pledge 4, which is promote peace and human rights. So here it is. No more illegal wars. Introduce a Prevention of Military Intervention Act and put human rights at the heart of foreign policy. Review all UK arms sales. Make us a force for international peace and justice. A force for international peace and justice, Michael. Well, has Starmer kept his word on that pledge?
Well, no, and in a quite substantial way. Of course, the Conservatives went to introduce an Overseas Operations Bill, which basically would have introduced a statute of limitations, so you can't prosecute military personnel for crimes that happened more than 5 years ago. And considering the UK has been involved in some pretty dodgy wars over 5 years ago, that's something which you could imagine making it harder to fight for human rights in the event that UK military personnel violate people's human rights. However, Keir Starmer ordered the party to abstain on this bill, and he actually kicked out 3 Labour MPs, kicked them off the cabinet for voting against the bill. So that's pretty damning, I would say.
Yes, absolutely, Michael. I mean, yeah, promoting peace and human rights, allowing British troops to commit torture. Not exactly keeping the pledge there. And also, Michael, we have to talk about the Spy Cops bill. And this is more of a domestic issue, of course. This concerns undercover agents getting away with crimes like rape and even murder that have, of course, historically targeted women and minorities. And yeah, again, Labour under Keir Starmer abstained on this Spy Cops bill. And yeah, essentially let the Conservatives just roll over and implement these new draconian laws, which again affect a lot of vulnerable people, and let agents of the state, commit crimes. I don't think that's a good thing, and certainly isn't in keeping with promoting human rights in this country for sure.
Hasn't started any illegal wars yet, though.
No, you're right, he hasn't. Yet, Michael, yet. But anyway,
time.
Anyway, we're going to skip number 5 and move on to number 6, which is defend migrant rights. So here's the pledge. Full voting rights for EU nationals. Defend free movement as we leave the EU. An immigration system based on compassion and dignity. And also end indefinite detention and the closure of centres such as Yarl's Wood, which of course he can't do until he's in power. But the first bit, Michael, defending migrants. Would you say that Labour under Starmer has successfully done this?
No, I wouldn't. I think it's very obvious here that he has failed to hold the Conservative government to account, particularly in the wake of the whole Channel fiasco, where there were people trying to, of course, cross the border, and the Conservatives were, let's say, using some pretty dehumanizing rhetoric around the whole issue. And did Keir Starmer say that this was absolutely unacceptable, that it was completely disgusting for the government of a free, liberal, first world country to be attacking these immigrants? Well, no. What he basically did is criticize them for being incompetent, which is a funny way of saying immoral. But yeah, that's the thing. He seems to be pandering very much to an anti-immigration sentiment by attacking the Conservatives' incompetence on immigration rather than the actual dehumanizing rhetoric they're using.
Yes, Michael. I remember back in August, Labour got quite a bit of backlash for just saying, the government is incompetent in how it's handling these horrible migrants. Instead of just calling out the fact that, you should not be basically allowing the treatment of migrants like this to happen. But anyway, I want to focus on a specific part of that pledge right now, which is in the second line, and it says, defend free movement as we leave the EU. Now, of course, everyone knew in April when Starmer was elected leader that the Tories and Boris Johnson would sign a deal with the EU, and it would probably restrict, freedom of movement for British citizens. And so therefore, when that deal eventually did happen in December 2020, was Keir Starmer standing up for freedom of movement? No, he was not, Michael. No, he was not. He basically waved the EU bill through that Boris Johnson agreed with the EU, which of course ended freedom of movement. And then I like this, he gagged Labour MPs from talking about it after. Labour MPs who criticised this bill, rightly so I'd say, were not allowed to speak about it in the press. So that's how much he cared about that particular pledge. And just to illustrate the hypocrisy of this, because of course Keir Starmer was a Remain hero back when he was in Jeremy Corbyn's cabinet, allow me to direct your attention to this meme. The secret Brexiteer, Jeremy Magic Grandpa Corbyn, successfully blocks every Tory Brexit deal in Parliament, but tells me I'm eventually going to have to compromise. No, we don't like that, do we? Instead, we love the much beloved face of Remain. Liberal hero Sir Keith Starmer QC imposes a 3-line whip to pass Boris Johnson's shitty Brexit. We love to see it, don't we, Michael? Again, of course, what that meme does is highlight the hypocrisy of, Starmer saying we must remain in the EU for all those years and then putting up a pathetic events when the bill did actually come. And of course, he told all Labour MPs to vote for it, and he did, and no one seems to care about it. People who didn't like Jeremy Corbyn still think he's a secret Brexiteer, and they still love Keir Starmer all the same. Yeah, again, these things just amaze me sometimes, but perhaps they shouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, given Starmer's willingness to completely sail European citizens living in the UK down the river, it makes one wonder what exactly he ever saw in the EU and why exactly he ever supported it.
Well, a cynical person might say, Michael, he supported that so thoroughly because it was damaging to Jeremy Corbyn. A cynical person might say that. But anyway, let's move on to his next pledge, which is about trade unions. So the pledge is strengthen workers' rights and trade unions. Work shoulder to shoulder with trade unions to stand up for working people. Tackle insecure work and low pay. Repeal the Trade Union Act and oppose Tory tax on the right to take industrial action and weakening of workplace rights. Okay, this is a good one. Oppose Tory attacks on the right to take industrial action. Of course, in the last year, Michael, there has been a pandemic going on, and this has affected many sections of society. And one of those sections is teaching and teachers. And would you like to tell us about what Keir Starmer has done in regards to the teachers' union?
Yeah, it's pretty cut and dry, really. He was quite fervent, actually, in just opposing the teachers' union on pretty much every level, and saying that they should not strike, they should not take any kind of industrial action, and even suggesting that they may have to work during the holidays. And of course, the reason for that being because the children need to be able to catch up, so teachers don't get a break, and they have to keep working through the holidays. And of course, many teachers oppose this. But yeah, it's like I said, it's pretty cut and dry. Keir Starmer basically said, no, the teachers' union should not be allowed to stand up for the industrial rights of teachers, and he just completely left them out to dry.
Yeah, the phrase letting them hang out to dry is accurate, I'd say. Remember, of course, Keir Starmer sacked Rebecca Long-Bailey, the Shadow Education Secretary, because she was defending the teachers' union, and he made up an excuse. It was anti-Semitism, a very good Labour right-wing tactic there that we've seen over and over again. But yeah, basically, he refused to back the teachers' union throughout the COVID pandemic. I remember back in January, he did not support the teachers' union, who said, of course, it was too unsafe for kids to go back to school, and he only did that after the government cancelled, the school term the very next day. And then he was like, yes, kids shouldn't go back to school, the teachers are right. Just absolutely refusing to stand up for them, even when it was blatantly obvious doing that would have been the correct call. So that's trade unions, Michael. Not great from Starmer, but has he fared better on pledge number 9, which is, of course, equality? Pull down obstacles that limit opportunities and talent. We are the party of Equal Pay Act, Sure Start, BAME representation, and the abolition of Section 28. We must build on that for a new decade. Has he built on that for a new decade, Michael? Has he? Because, of course, just a couple of months into his leadership, the Black Lives Matter movement sprung up, of course, after the death of George Floyd. Protests happened in America, protests happened in the UK. And, of course, what happened?
Well, he called it a Black Lives Matter moment, which, let's say, it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, of course, because it does sound, let's be honest, quite dismissive. And I think it's a general trend of Keir Starmer. He's obviously not come out and said anything overtly racist or anything like that, of course, but he just does have terrible optics on this thing. And of course, dismissively calling the Black Lives Matter movement a moment is an example of that. Another example, actually, I found quite funny, is that in the wake of concerns amongst BAME members of Labour, he set up a diversity panel, and it was all white. And it excluded several prominent BAME Labour members.
Yeah, and of course there was also the Labour Leaks report, which came out a couple of weeks after he became a Labour leader, basically describing a lot of racism that was going on within the party that people like Dawn Butler or Diane Abbott had been subjected to. And yeah, that was completely ignored by Starmer as well. But after those comments, by the way, Michael, you mentioned about him calling Black Lives Matter a moment. What he did was he went to racial sensitivity training. And of course, there was that picture with him and Angela Rayner kneeling on the floor to show support for the Black Lives Matter movement. I am surprised he didn't do what the Democrats did and wore kente cloth. That was an absolute iconic moment from Nancy Pelosi and the rest of the Democrats. But yeah, he didn't go that far. But that is all we expected to talk about on the equality issue, Michael, concerning Keir Starmer, until last weekend, where Starmer decided because it was Easter, he would visit the church, Jesus' house, at the weekend. Now, sadly, Starmer deleted the video of him visiting that place, but you can see a screenshot of it on your screen right now. I recently visited Jesus' House UK to hear about their crucial work in the community. Churches across the country have played such a vital role in the fight against the virus. I hope everyone has a good, restful and safe Easter weekend. Apart from the gays, of course, because this church was a notorious church which is still known for pushing gay conversion therapy, a form of basically torture against gay people. And as you can see in that screenshot, Starmer is saying it's a wonderful example of a church. Now that was bad, but I think it's fair to say things may have got a little bit worse after Rachel Reeves, who I think will do anything and everything to get that shadow chancellor job, basically went on Sky News and defended Starmer's visit to that church, saying he did it because it was a vaccine centre. Watch.
Well, I don't think anyone can doubt Keir Starmer's and Labour's commitment to the rights of the LGBT plus community. Just in the last couple of weeks, Labour have been calling out the government on its failure to ban conversion therapy, for example, and Keir Starmer has spoken very powerfully and passionately about what Labour would do in government. He was visiting a vaccine centre. That doesn't mean that we endorse all the views that people who worship there would potentially endorse.
So that was just it, Michael. He was visiting a vaccine centre. It wasn't about the church itself. It was because of the vaccines, and it's just such a coincidence that he happened to visit that church on Easter weekend and say specifically in the tweet about how he was visiting it because it was Easter. Now, it was all about the vaccines, wasn't it?
Yeah, and again, I mean, this I think also falls into an example of, obviously, I don't think that we're suggesting Keir Starmer secretly supports conversion therapy or anything like that. He doesn't seem like the kind of guy who would be overtly homophobic, but it's just another example of bad optics and particularly incompetence. I think that's the main takeaway, that he didn't bother to look into the beliefs of the church before he decided to praise it.
Yeah, I think the reason why he went to the church in the first place must have been incompetence, but you have to consider, Michael, the fact that Rachel Reeves was put up on Sky just a couple of days later to say, oh no, it was a vaccine centre, that's why, did, I think, completely dismiss the concerns of the gay community, who, of course, didn't like the fact that Starmer visited that church. And so you could argue, yes, initially it was incompetence, but the fact that she said that was quite disrespectful. So anyway, that was equality, Michael. We are now going to move on to pledge number 10, which is titled Effective Opposition. So here we go, pledge number 10. Effective opposition to the Tories. Forensic. Oh, you'd love to see it. Effective opposition to the Tories in Parliament. Linked up to our mass membership and a professional election operation. Oh yeah, that mass membership has come really in handy for Keir this last year. Never lose sight of the votes lent to the Tories in 2019. Unite our party, promote pluralism and improve our culture. Oh yeah, definitely, 100% done that. Robust action to eradicate the scourge of anti-Semitism, maintain our collective link with the unions. Okay, so let's start with the first one. Effective opposition to the Tories, Michael. Has Keir Starmer done this? Has he been a thorn in Boris Johnson's side over the last year?
Well, obviously, this has been the thing that Starmer's been doing the most as the leader of the opposition, or the thing he should have been doing the most, perhaps I should say, because he really hasn't been. And I've just got one example of this, which is that he came out saying that he would support whatever measures the government takes in curbing the pandemic. And I would say, when you've come out as opposition leader and declared unequivocal, unconditional support for the government, that probably means you're not a very good opposition leader. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that entirely, Michael. And throughout the whole pandemic, he has refused to basically call out the government's incompetence. It's been quite a wild thing to see. Also, Robert Jenrick, the Culture Secretary, had been accused of being corrupt. Starmer let him off the hook, and in fact, the same day the news of Jenrick's possible corruption hit the news was the same day that Starmer sacked Rebecca Long-Bailey, completely taking Jenrick off the front page news and putting the fact that Starmer had sacked his education secretary right up there. So yeah, completely taking the focus off possible Conservative corruption. He'd love to see it. And yeah, he wasn't going to oppose Priti Patel's anti-democracy bill until what happened at the Sarah Everhard vigil, as we covered in a video a couple of weeks ago. And of course, he didn't oppose the government when, the Spy Cops bill was being voted on. either. And yeah, recently, in an astonishing move, he has basically conceded that yes, the Conservative government should take over the city of Liverpool. There's no point in having new elections to root out the corruption, and there was corruption going on within Liverpool. No, the Conservatives just should take over the city. And yeah, that is quite a slap in the face to a place which has always voted Labour and has always voted the Tories. So yeah, I think it's fair to say that Starmer has not stood up to the Conservative Party. And of course, back to the pledge for a sec, Michael, there was a line which was Unite Our Party. And this, of course, reading now in April 2021 is hilarious considering what happened to Jeremy Corbyn. Starmer, of course, stripped him of being a Labour MP for posting a quite innocuous statement after the EHRC report on Labour anti-Semitism was published. And yeah, it was a very aggressive move, did not unite the party at all. A lot of people who were Corbyn supporters were very unhappy with him. So yeah, just completely the opposite move to do if you want to unite the Labour Party. So I think on this pledge number 10, it's probably the pledge that Starmer has failed the most at out of all of them, which is quite nice because it's the last pledge we're doing. So would you agree with that, Michael?
No, yeah, and I do agree with you. I think it's important to end on a high note, or perhaps a low note, depending on your perspective.
Yes, and of course, as some of you might have noticed, that our pledges we have left out, but we have left them out basically because it's unknown until, or if Starmer ever becomes Prime Minister or releases a manifesto, then we won't know if he's kept those pledges until then that we haven't gone through. But yeah, I think it's fair to say the pledges we did cover, he's probably gone back on at least 7 of them. And here's the thing, his supporters might say, well, you know what? Pledges and principles can be discarded if it means that Starmer is electable and Labour win back power. As you know, you can't do all those great things unless you're in charge, unless you're in government. So there is a justification there, I guess, but let's have a look at the polling now, Michael. Let's see if Keir Starmer and Labour underneath him are anywhere close to being back in power. And I think if you look at polling over the last few weeks, you can pretty much find any poll that shows Labour either 7 points to 10 points behind the Conservatives. So yeah, if you just want to look at polling, you'll be able to find that. But I want to focus specifically on the Hartlepool by-election poll, because of course there's going to be a by-election in Hartlepool coming up on the 6th of May. And yeah, this poll from that place, which came out a couple of days ago, was very interesting. So here is the poll, as you can see on your screen. Michael, can you describe what that poll shows?
Well, it shows something huge, Luke, which is that the Northern Independence Party has 2%. Soon this will be an international podcast, clearly. No, but of course the big news is that this has Labour losing, according to this poll, by 7 points to the Conservative Party. So in Hartlepool. And obviously Hartlepool is historically very pro-Labour.
Yeah, I don't think Labour have lost this seat since the 1950s. And of course under Jeremy Corbyn, he won the seat twice. So if Keir Starmer were to lose this, my God, that would be embarrassing. I did like the reaction to this from Starmer supporters on Twitter. I'll just show you a couple here. They were very angry with not what the poll showed, but the fact that the poll was commissioned in the first place. This is from Ben Bradshaw. Hey, Dave Ward, who commissioned the poll. How about helping out on the Labour doorstep in Hartlepool and elsewhere, instead of spending CWU News members' money on a dodgy-looking unweighted poll with leading questions and using it to undermine Keir Starmer? And Toby Perkins also chimes in saying, instead of spending his members' money running tiny polls to undermine UK Labour campaign, David Ward could more usefully get himself up to Hartlepool. A lot more than 42% of voters I've met are voting for Paul Williams, who's of course the Labour candidate for Hartlepool, is Paul Williams. So Michael, what do you make of that?
Well, I do think it shows that there are some people out there who genuinely believe that Keir Starmer is this great politician who we should expect to do well, and they consider these polls, there must be something wrong with them. And honestly, I don't know why they believe that, because I don't see how anyone can genuinely think Keir Starmer is somebody who would inspire people to vote for Labour. And I say this with the fact that I think Keir Starmer does have certainly more media backing on his side than Corbyn, so there is no grand conspiracy against him. He's just not very good.
Yeah, I'd have to say I agree with you. And the thing is, Keir Starmer and his supporters have been putting out this narrative that the reason why the Conservatives are doing so well is because of a vaccine bounce. But take a look at Starmer's polling here. This is specifically about him. As you can see, this is net percent satisfied. And in January 2021, among Conservative voters, it's -15, as you might expect. But among all voters, it's -9. And among Labour voters, it's only +19. And that was down from about +65 in June 2020. So his ratings have absolutely collapsed, especially among Labour supporters. So yeah, I don't think Labour's poor poll results can just be down to a vaccine bounce from the Conservatives. It seems like people really do not like Keir Starmer. And so yeah, I think looking back on this past year, you would have to conclude, considering how many pledges he has to walk back on, considering the fact that he's down in the polls and may even lose Hartlepool, and it seems the general public don't like him. Yeah, I don't think it has been a successful year for Starmer.
No, yes, I would say to say it's been unsuccessful almost feels like an understatement.
Yeah, and here's the thing, Michael, I would completely agree with you. But I have another suspicion that maybe doing well in the polls isn't Keir Starmer and basically his section of the Labour Party, the right wing of Labour. It isn't their top priority. And I am going to use an interview from Alan Johnson, who was giving his thoughts on Keir Starmer's first year as Labour leader to illustrate my point. Alan Johnson is a former Labour MP who's Blairite, very anti-Corbyn. So yeah, let's watch that interview.
I think you have to be in the Labour Party to really appreciate where we were in December 2019 compared to where we are now. I mean, I thought we were finished. When you see us losing Redcar, Bishop, Auckland, Sedgefield, Grimsby, Scunthorpe, Bolsover, yeah, it really looked as if it might all be over for us. Not because of that election result, but because this cult of the far left had virtually taken over the party at all levels. And it looked as if the only successor to Corbyn would be a Corbynista, and then we'd get more of the same. For Keir Starmer to, first of all, be brave enough to put himself forward for what is a awful job, even more terrible in circumstances the Labour Party was in, and then turn that around. In June, we'll talk about where we are now, but in June, he reached the highest rating for an opposition leader, any opposition leader, since records began, since they started to record that in the early 70s. And now it's not too bad, by the way. There's been a boost for the government with the vaccine, of course.
You think 10 points off is not too bad?
But I feel, 26 points off when Keir Starmer was elected. And, you can sum up where the Tories are now in one word, which is vaccine. So, no, he's had a tremendous first year, more than anyone could expect.
Okay, so that's the interview. Several things, of course. Firstly, Alan Johnson talks about, Labour losing Bolsover and Redcar. Well, it looks like they might be about to lose Hartlepool as well. So that's something. And also, he talks about how, Keir Starmer was so popular in June 2020. But of course, why not mention what has happened recently, Alan? Oh, it's because his ratings have absolutely plummeted. There's no point in talking about his poll results from literally almost a year ago. Let's look at now, and it isn't great, is it? And he also talks about how the hard left have taken over, or were taking over, every level of the party, which is just complete nonsense. I think like 70% of Labour members in Parliament, the MPs, did not like Jeremy Corbyn. They were thoroughly against him, and that might even be an underestimation. And yeah, one last thing, he also talks about the fact that, Starmer was 26 points behind the Tories when he took over. And that, again, was because this is when COVID hit the UK for the first time, and governments across the world, including the UK, saw a massive increase in their approval because they were dealing with the pandemic. It happened in the United States with Trump, in Italy, in France, in Germany, and it happened in the UK. So when Starmer takes over, and yeah, you can see the Conservatives have this massive lead over Labour. And then, of course, eventually it came down to normal, and Labour under Starmer were actually beating the Conservative Party in around November and December time. But then it has reverted to where it is now, where, yeah, Labour are basically 10 points behind. Some polls have it at 7, but yeah, around 10 to 7 is average. So basically, Michael, I think Alan Johnson is wrong on Starmer, but the key thing that he said was that the hard left cult of Jeremy Corbyn have been, taken down by Keir Starmer. And that, for me, I think is the key indication of why he thinks that Starmer has done a tremendous job. He talked firstly about, within the party, that's where the big difference has been made. So it's not really about Labour being successful, it's about within Labour. The Blairites, or the right wing of the Labour Party, have taken over Labour once again. Starmer has done very well at pushing the left out of Labour, and that for him and Starmer, it appears, is their number one priority. And so that's why this year has been so tremendous and so successful. That's what I took from that interview. Do you agree?
Yeah, that definitely does sound like what he's saying. And I guess the issue is, you would think surely that, the way they've always phrased it has been as if it's like you need to get rid of the left so that Labour becomes electable. But at this point, it's almost like there's been a bait and switch where it's kind of like electability has now been replaced with just getting rid of the left, even when doing that actually hurts Labour's electability, because they end up putting in somebody like Keir Starmer, who doesn't seem to stand for anything except for opposing many of the core values of the party he's supposedly the leader of.
Yeah, I agree. And at the end of the day, I think that Keir Starmer doesn't really care, and his section of the Labour Party, about fighting the Conservative Party. They only care, or their number one priority was getting the party back from Jeremy Corbyn. I think that section of the Labour Party will happily damage the chances of Labour winning an election by not supporting popular left-wing policies if it means driving out the left from the Labour Party, as can be seen in Hartlepool. For example, 42% of Hartlepool voters would support a 10% pay rise for nurses, and 43% would support a 3% pay rise, which is more than both Labour and the Conservatives are offering. So that's about 85% would support a healthy pay rise for nurses. Also, 67% of Hartlepool voters would support investing more in public services, with only 24% supporting paying off the deficit. And finally, Hartlepool voters, when asked the question, would they support or oppose a policy of providing all households and businesses free broadband by 2030, 69% supported it and 18% opposed it. And of course, this was the big policy that a lot of critics of Jeremy Corbyn looked at and said, look, this is unrealistic, we're not going to win elections if you promise things like free broadband. And actually, almost 70% of Hartlepool voters support this. And yeah, it looks like if Labour lose, it will be because they and Keir Starmer have not come out with these policies and really pushed them. And to be honest, Michael, I think that's the sad thing under Keir Starmer. Labour have a chance to win back seats, they have a chance to win back power, but they're not going to do it. Because that would mean adopting some of Corbyn's playbook, and I think, as we can see from the last year, that is the absolute last thing Starmer wants to do, even if it ends up costing Labour votes and seats, like what could happen in Hartlepool.
Yeah, I agree, and I do think there is such a gaping opportunity, and it's kind of just depressing to see the lack of imagination in Labour and the lack of enthusiasm for winning. And it's just genuinely, all memes aside, it's genuinely disheartening that they seem to just be more enthused about defeating people in their own party than they are about defeating the Conservatives, who are ripe to being defeated when you look at who their leader is, their general situation, and obviously how badly they failed the country. But Labour aren't going to do anything about it.
Yeah, I think depressing is the right word, Michael. Incredibly, incredibly depressing.